Noticed the moment my future mother-in-law looked past me to find someone more important to talk to. Not a glance, not distraction. A deliberate pivot, mid-sentence, as if I had simply stopped existing. That was 20 minutes into the dinner, before the lamb chops, before the wine, before everything that came after. But I need to back up, because the moment that mattered most didn't happen at the table. It happened 3 days earlier, when my boyfriend told me his parents wanted to meet me, and I decided, quietly and without telling him exactly how I would show up. My name is Vivienne. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years I've been a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Department of Justice. I work out of the D.C. field office. Before that, I clerked for a circuit court judge, and before that, Georgetown Law, full scholarship. I don't say any of this to impress anyone. I say it because none of it was visible the night I drove 40 minutes into the Virginia suburbs to have dinner with my boyfriend's family for the first time. My boyfriend is a good man. His name is Callum. We met at a farmer's market in Adams Morgan on a Saturday morning when we both reached for the last bunch of fresh dill at the same time. He's a high school history teacher. He coaches junior varsity soccer on Wednesdays. He brings his students coffee during finals week out of his own pocket. He has never once asked me what I earn, and I've never volunteered it. That's not unusual. We don't talk about money the way some couples do, cataloging each other's worth in salary figures. We talk about books, about where we want to travel, about what we'd name a dog we don't own yet. But he had told his parents something. He'd told them I worked in law. That was the word he used, apparently. Law. Like a junior associate at a mid-size firm, like a paralegal, like someone still figuring it out. He didn't say it to diminish me. He just didn't know how to explain federal prosecution to people who had never spent much time thinking about the Justice Department. And I didn't correct him when he mentioned it. I made a choice, not out of manipulation, not out of some calculated plan. I just wanted to see who they were first. I'd learned enough in courtrooms to know that people reveal themselves most clearly when they think no one is watching the score. His parents live in a neighborhood called Briarwood Crossing, the kind of suburb where every house has a two-car garage and a seasonal wreath on the door. The kind of place where the lawns are maintained by someone else and the neighbors wave to each other from driveways. His father was retired military, Army, 2 years. His mother taught middle school English for 3 decades before stepping back to, as she put it, enjoy her life a little. On paper, they sounded like people I would like. People who had worked hard, who understood service, who valued education. I brought a bottle of Bordeaux and a small arrangement of grocery store flowers because I didn't want to arrive empty-handed, but I also didn't want to arrive with anything that announced itself. His father answered the door. Broad shoulders, short gray hair, the kind of handshake that means something to the person giving it. He looked at me the way men like him sometimes look at young women, assessing, not unkindly, but from a height. His mother appeared behind him with a wide smile and a hug that felt genuine. She smelled like lavender and something baking. The house smelled like it too. Warm, orderly, lived in. Photos on the walls, Callum at prom, Callum in his soccer uniform, a family Christmas portrait where everyone wore matching sweaters and no one looked annoyed about it. I felt, standing there, like an exhibit that had just entered a museum it didn't belong to. We sat in the living room first, the way families do when they're not quite ready for the intimacy of a dinner table. His mother offered me tea. His father offered me something stronger. I took the tea. Conversation started where it always starts. How was the drive? What's the traffic like coming out of the city? Do you live close to the office? His mother asked if I had a parking spot or if I took the metro. Normal questions. I answered them normally. I was careful not to say too much. Then his father leaned back in his recliner and looked at me with the comfortable authority of someone who is used to being the most experienced person in a room. "So you're in law," he said. "What kind?" "Government," I said. He nodded slowly. "Regulatory," he offered. "Like EPA, something like that?" Something like that, I said, which was technically untrue, but not something I wanted to spend 15 minutes clarifying before dinner. He nodded again. Government pay, he said, not unkindly, isn't exactly what it used to be. Good benefits, though. Right, I said. His mother jumped in before the silence stretched. Callum says you two met at a market? She asked, turning the subject with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent 30 years managing a classroom. That's so sweet. Do you cook? I do, I said. She seemed pleased by that. Callum doesn't cook nearly enough, she said. He eats frozen burritos for dinner sometimes. Can you imagine? I smiled. I can imagine. We moved to the dining room. The table was set properly, cloth napkins, good china, water glasses already filled. His mother had clearly put effort into the meal, and that mattered to me. Effort means something. The food was good: roasted lamb with rosemary potatoes, green beans with almonds, rolls that were still warm. His father poured wine for everyone. He poured mine last. During dinner, his mother asked about my family. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? I told her. Small town in Ohio. My mother was a dental hygienist. My father ran a small landscaping company until his knees gave out. She made a sympathetic sound about the knees. His father asked if I'd gone to school in Ohio. No, I said. D.C. His father raised an eyebrow. Geedwell? Georgetown? Georgetown, T-Nod, I said. He looked mildly impressed. That's not cheap, he said. No, I said. I had a scholarship. He moved on before I could say anything else, and somehow I got the sense that the scholarship was more interesting to him than the school. Not the other way around. Over the main course, the conversation shifted to Callum. His parents talked about him the way parents talk about their children in front of guests, with a kind of proud proprietorship, as if he were a project they'd completed. His father mentioned that Callum had been accepted to law school years ago and chosen teaching instead. His tone was not quite disapproval, but it lived next door to it. He's always done things his way, his father said. His mother softened it. He's passionate about his students. His father nodded. Passion doesn't pay the mortgage, he said, and then laughed in a way that meant he was serious. Callum looked at his plate. I'd seen that look before. The look of a man who had heard this joke many times and had long since stopped finding it funny. Then his mother turned to me again and asked gently, with the kind of tone that's supposed to feel like curiosity but is actually an assessment, do you see yourself staying in government long term, or is this a stepping stone? I paused. To what? She smiled. Oh, you know, private sector. A firm, something with more growth potential. I smiled back. I like what I do. She nodded in that way people nod when they're waiting for a real answer. His father was less subtle. He cut into his lamb and said, without looking up, what's the ceiling, though? In government work like yours, where does it go? I've thought about the cases I'd tried. The fraud case last year that had taken 18 months to build and ended in a verdict that made the evening news. The organized crime referrals that crossed my desk that I couldn't discuss at a dinner table. I've thought about my supervisor calling me into his office 3 months ago to tell me I was being considered for a senior position. I thought about the commendation letter that was currently sitting in my desk drawer at the office. I said, there's more room than most people think. He looked up. You'd have to really grind for years before you made partner at a real firm, he said. At least in government, you get the pension. I understood then what was happening. Not cruelty, not hostility. He had already decided what I was, and he was being generous within the limits of that decision. He was offering me dignity inside a box he had built before I'd finished my first cup of tea. I was government pay, no growth potential, decent benefits, modest ceiling. I was fine for his son, the teacher. Practical. Appropriate. Nothing to object to. His mother asked if I wanted more potatoes. I said yes. She handed me the serving spoon. I'm sure that meant nothing to her. I'm nearly certain she didn't register it. But I sat there holding that spoon for a half second too long, thinking, this is it. This is exactly the thing I came to see. We moved through the rest of the meal. Callum talked about his students. His father asked about the school's funding situation and shook his head at the answer. His mother brought out a blueberry pie she'd made from scratch, and the conversation softened into the kind of easy, comfortable small talk that fills the last 20 minutes of a dinner when everyone is a little full and slightly tired. Then his father looked at me across the table and said, I have to ask. Callum mentioned you've tried some cases. What kind of cases do you handle, actually? I set my fork down. Federal criminal prosecution, I said. Mostly white-collar fraud, some public corruption. I've worked on a few organized crime referrals. He frowned slightly, the way people frown when they're recalibrating. That's not regulatory work. No, I said, is the criminal division. The table was quiet for a moment. How long have you been doing that? He asked. 6 years, I said. I was an assistant U.S. attorney first. Now I'm a senior trial attorney. He stared at me. His mother set down her pie fork. So when you said government, his father said slowly. I mean I work for the Justice Department, I said. I prosecute federal crimes. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, and Callum knew this? Callum opened his mouth. I didn't tell him to say anything. I just looked at his father calmly. He knew I was in law, I said. He knew I worked for the government. He never asked for more detail than that, and I didn't offer it. His father looked at his son. Callum had expression on his face I hadn't seen before. Not embarrassment, something more complicated. Like a man who has just realized the building he's standing in is taller than he thought. You're a federal prosecutor, his father said again quietly. Yes. He nodded once, slowly. Then he picked up his wine glass and held it without drinking. The dinner resumed, but the air in the room had changed, not dramatically. Subtly, the way pressure changes before a storm, his mother refilled my water glass without being asked. His father addressed his next question to me instead of past me, small adjustments, tiny realignments, the invisible machinery of social hierarchy doing what it always does when it gets new information. And I noticed all of it. His mother asked about my caseload in a voice that had gone a shade more careful. His father asked about how federal prosecution worked, whether I worked with the FBI, whether the cases I handled went to trial or mostly settled. He was genuinely curious now, interested in the way people become interested when they discover the thing they dismissed was more substantial than they thought. The pie was finished. Coffee was offered and accepted. At some point his mother said, almost to herself, I had no idea. I understand, I said. But she hadn't quite meant it as an apology. It was more like a statement of fact offered to the room. I had no idea, as if my not telegraphing my credentials was a mild inconvenience she was choosing to forgive. That was the moment that stayed with me longer than any other. Not what they said after. Not the gracious turn in tone, not the additional questions, not the warmth that came into his father's voice when he mentioned that his old CO had worked with the Justice Department once, some kind of task force. Not even the way his mother hugged me at the door with more feeling than when I'd arrived. The moment that stayed with me was the serving spoon. In the car, Callum didn't start the engine right away. I'm sorry, he said. I shook my head. You didn't do anything wrong. I should have told them more about you. I looked at him. Why? He opened his mouth and closed it again. He was trying to find the right thing to say, and he was smart enough to know that most of the obvious things were wrong. Because they treated you like you were nothing, he finally said. They treated me the way they thought was appropriate, I said. That's the problem. He frowned. What's the difference? I watched the suburban street outside the window, porch lights on, someone's sprinkler running in the dark. They weren't cruel, I said. They were comfortable, and comfort is the most honest thing a person can show you about themselves. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, My dad was impressed. I know. That probably feels wrong. It does, I said, but not for the reason you might think. He started the engine. He didn't ask me to explain, and I didn't. Some things have to settle before you can say them out loud. That night I lay awake in my apartment in Columbia Heights. The city sounds coming through the window the way they always do, sirens and music and buses and all the ordinary noise of a place that never fully sleeps. I thought about the dinner. I thought about his father's tone in the first hour, the casual certainty with which he had arranged me into a category and begun treating me accordingly. I thought about his mother offering me the serving spoon. I thought about the word she used, government, how she said it like a verdict. And I thought about something I'd learned in my first year as a prosecutor, when I was 25 years old and still had something to prove to every room I walked into. A senior attorney pulled me aside after I'd won my first trial and told me something I've never forgotten. She said, "The most important thing you will ever learn in this job is how to watch people when they think there are no consequences, because that's when you find out what they actually believe." I had not gone to that dinner to humiliate anyone. I had not gone to set a trap or run an experiment or prove a point. I had gone because I loved Callum and I wanted to know who the people who raised him were when they thought I didn't matter. That was information I needed, not as a prosecutor, as a person. 3 days later, Callum called me in the morning before I got to the office. "My dad wants to know if he can take us to dinner," he said. "To make up for it, I think." I was quiet for a moment. "For what?" Callum hesitated. He said he felt like he was dismissive. "I appreciate that," I said. "So is that a yes?" "I'll think about it." I did think about it. I went to work. I spent the morning on a call with an FBI agent about a fraud case we were building. I ate lunch at my desk. I thought about his father's face when I said criminal division, the way his expression shifted, not with shame but with recalibration, like a compass needle finding magnetic north. I called Callum back that afternoon. Tell him yes. The dinner was at a steakhouse in Arlington, his father's choice, which felt deliberate, the kind of place where men in his generation take people they want to respect in public. Good lighting, thick menus, the kind of service where the waiter knows when to appear and when not to. His father stood when I arrived at the table. He'd never done that before. We shook hands. He held on a beat longer than necessary, the way people do when they're trying to communicate something they don't quite have words for. His mother hugged me and said my name, specifically my name, not dear, not honey, my actual name, like she'd practiced using it. The dinner was pleasant, more than pleasant. His father asked real questions. Not about credentials, not about cases I couldn't discuss, but about the work. What drew me to prosecution? Whether I found it disheartening sometimes? What I thought about the state of federal institutions, which is a real question for a retired Army man, the kind of question that comes from somewhere genuine. At one point he said, "I owe you an honest conversation." I looked at him across the table. "When you came to the house," he said, "I made assumptions. I knew I was doing it. I do it with everyone. You build a picture fast because that's what you're trained to do in the service. You assess, you categorize, you move." He paused. "But that's not always a virtue." I listened. "The way I spoke to you," he said, "the ceiling question. I want you to know I heard it after you left. The way it sounded, and I wasn't proud of it." "I wasn't angry at you," I said. "I was paying attention to you. Those are different things." He nodded slowly. He understood the distinction. It was a man who had spent 22 years giving and taking evaluations. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." He folded his hands on the table. "If you had actually been exactly who I thought you were, just someone in a low-level government job, nothing remarkable on paper, would you have sat through that dinner and stayed quiet the same way?" "I've thought about it." "Yes," I said, "because the dinner wasn't about my credentials. It was about whether I wanted to be around people who treat strangers with dignity before they know their worth." He didn't speak for a moment. His mother looked down at her plate. Callum picked up his water glass and put it down without drinking. His father exhaled slowly. That's a harder standard than I've been living by, he said finally. Most people's are, I said. We finished dinner. The conversation moved to easier things. His mother asked about my parents again, this time with real interest, asking follow-up questions, remembering what I told her the first time. His father told a story about his early years in the army, something funny involving a training exercise and a misrouted supply truck that made all of us laugh. The food was good. The evening was good. But when Callum and I walked to the car afterward, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something quieter and harder to name. Callum took my hand as we crossed the parking lot. They really like you, he said. I know, I said. He looked at me. But? I squeezed his hand. I want to be liked for the right reasons. He was quiet. Then you think they only like you now because of what you do. I thought about how to say it accurately. I think, I said, that your father knows how to respect credentials, and your mother knows how to adjust to new information. Those are real skills. I'm not dismissing them, I just want to know if they're capable of something harder. He stopped walking. What's harder? Respecting someone before you know why you should. He looked at me for a long time under the parking lot lights. I don't know if I always do that either, he said. I know, I said. Me either, but at least we can admit it. That was the most important thing either of us said that month. The weeks that followed were strange in the way that quiet weeks are when something underneath them has changed and you're not sure yet what it means. His parents sent a card to my office thanking me for both dinners. His mother included a handwritten note inside that mentioned she was reading about the history of the DOJ because, she wrote, she realized she didn't know as much about it as she should. His father called Callum and apparently talked for 40 minutes about criminal justice policy, not about me, just about the subject. Like he'd opened a door he'd kept closed. I didn't know how to feel about any of it. Callum noticed. One evening in my apartment, while we were cooking dinner, he put down the wooden spoon he was using and turned around and said, "You're not sure whether to trust it." I looked at him. "The change," he said. "You're not sure if it's real." I turned back to the stove. "Is that bad?" "No," he said. He came to stand beside me. "But I want you to know something." I waited. "I've been thinking about what you said, about respecting someone before you know why you should." He picked the spoon back up. "I think I didn't do that well at the dinner." "You weren't unkind," I said. "I wasn't present," he said. "There's a difference." When my dad made the ceiling comment, I should have said something. I didn't because I was used to letting him lead. That's a habit I've had my whole life, and I think you deserved better than that. I didn't respond right away. I kept stirring. "It matters," I said finally. He nodded. "I know, I'm working on it." That was a real thing, not a performance, not an apology designed to end the conversation, just an honest accounting of what he understood he still needed to learn. I believed him, not completely, not unconditionally, but enough to keep going. At Thanksgiving that year, we went to his parents' house. His father made turkey in the smoker outside, which took most of the day. His mother made everything else. I brought a pie I'd actually baked myself, which surprised everyone, including me. His father and I spent an hour on the back porch while the turkey finished. He asked about a case he'd read about in the news. Federal public corruption. Wanted to know how cases like that were built, what the evidentiary bar looked like. He asked smart questions. He listened to the answers. At one point he said, looking at the yard, "You know what I thought of you when you first walked in the door?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said. He laughed quietly. I was wrong. "I know." He looked at me sideways. "Does it still bother you?" "I've thought about it honestly. A little," I said. "Not because of you specifically, because of what it means about how often it happens." He nodded. He got it. A man who had spent 2 decades watching people be judged by rank, he got it faster than most. I don't know how to fix that, he said. Neither do I said, but I think noticing it is the start. The dinner that Thanksgiving was the loudest, warmest, most genuinely pleasant meal I'd had in years. His mother laughed until she cried at something his cousin said. His father fell asleep in the recliner after dinner with the football game on, which was apparently a tradition and which everyone found deeply comforting. Callum sat next to me on the couch and put his arm around me and didn't let go for most of the second half. I looked around that room and thought about something I had told a law school classmate once, early in my career, when she'd asked me how I handled being underestimated in court. I told her, let them. It costs you nothing and it tells you everything. It was still true, but I understood it differently now, sitting in that living room with the fire going and the game on and the smell of pie still in the air. Being underestimated is only cheap if you know your own worth. The real cost isn't to you, it's to the person who did it. Every time someone measures a person by the wrong metric, they lose the chance to know something true. That's the thing they can never get back. I didn't get an apology in a parking lot and suddenly trust it. I watched his father ask real questions and listened for the difference between curiosity and performance. I watched his mother use my name. I watched Callum put down the wooden spoon and say the thing that was harder to say. I watched all of it and I made my own decision slowly, the way I make every decision that matters. There's a line I use sometimes in closing arguments, borrowed from a mentor who borrowed it from someone before her. The evidence doesn't lie, but it doesn't always speak first. Sometimes you have to wait for it. I've been waiting, and I'm still watching. And most days I think what I'm seeing is worth staying for. I still think about the serving spoon sometimes, not with bitterness, more like the way you think about a specific detail in a dream that turned out to mean something. It was such a small thing. His mother didn't even register doing it. She was just clearing space, managing the table, moving the dinner along. But I registered it. I registered every small thing that happened in that dining room before anyone knew who I was. And I think that's the only way to actually learn anything true about a situation. What happened with Callum's family wasn't unusual. That's the part I had to sit with afterward. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even snobbery. Not exactly. It was something more ordinary and more widespread than either of those things. It was people operating on assumptions they'd never had to question because no one had ever handed them a reason to. His father had spent 22 years in the army learning to assess fast and act on the assessment. That skill kept people alive in certain contexts. In a dining room in Virginia, it just meant he'd decided who I was before the lamb chops were served. The thing about assumptions is that they're not really about the person being assumed about. They're about the person doing the assuming and what they've decided they don't need to look closer at. When his father made the ceiling comment, when his mother offered me the spoon, they weren't being unkind. They were being efficient. And efficiency, when it's applied to people, is where character either holds or doesn't. I've thought a lot about what it took to sit through that first dinner without announcing myself. People sometimes hear that and think it required restraint, like holding your breath. It didn't feel like that. It felt more like paying attention. The same quality I need in a courtroom when a witness is on the stand and I'm listening not just to what they say, but to what they assume I don't notice. Staying quiet when you could speak is only hard if you believe the speaking is what gives you value. I learned a long time ago that it isn't. What Callum's father did at that second dinner took something different, something I have genuine respect for. He sat across from me, cut into his steak, and said plainly that he'd been wrong, and that he knew it while he was doing it. That last part matters more than most people realize. Not I didn't know, but I knew and I did it anyway, and I'm telling you now, that's not a comfortable thing to say out loud. It takes a particular kind of honesty that doesn't come automatically to anyone, regardless of how much they've achieved or how long they've lived. And Callum standing in my kitchen with a wooden spoon saying he should have defended me and didn't because silence was easier, that was its own form of courage. The willingness to name a habit instead of excuse it. The willingness to keep going even when the thing you're working on is yourself. I don't think I walked into that first dinner knowing what I was looking for. I think I was just tired. In the quiet way you get tired after years of having to establish yourself in every room, of needing a credential to earn a full sentence. I went to see what was true, and the truth told itself, as it usually does, in the smallest available moments. What I know now is this. Character isn't what you display when the stakes are obvious. It's what you default to when you think there are none. The way you treat the person you've already decided is ordinary. That's the measure. That's the only one that actually counts. I'm still watching. I think I always will be. But most days now, what I see is worth staying for.